At Kina Mutual Group, we believe that a brighter financial future should be accessible to everyone. That's really important. Kina Mutual Group and its foundation has a long-standing history of investing in the community where we have a footprint. Every year, we're averaging at least 9,000, 10,000 volunteer hours that are reported and recorded. But each one of those community members always.
The Our Home is the training ground for her dreams policy from American Family Insurance. Insure carefully. Dream fearlessly.
Hi, I'm Kim Sponham, CEO and President of Summit Credit Union. We are so excited to sponsor another Madison 365 Women's Leadership Summit. Women's financial health is especially important to us at Summit Credit Union, and we've focused on it for more than a decade. Women are twice as likely as men to associate negative emotions with their finances, and it's no mystery why. Women still earn less than men for a variety of reasons. Women have less saved for retirement, and they're almost half as likely to invest in the stock market when compared to their male counterparts. But we're also seeing positive signs. There are more female entrepreneurs than ever before, and we know from experience that women with higher levels of financial literacy tend to save more, spend more wisely, and invest more than their peers. I encourage you to use this conference as an opportunity to improve your own financial literacy and find inspiration in the incredible women joining us today. Thank you for letting us be a part of your journey.
Hi, everyone. I am Brandy Grayson. I will be the moderator today of this beautiful panel. We are so excited. For the people who don't know me, I am the CEO and founder of Urban Triage. We are located in Madison. We serve Dane County in the greater area. Our focus for our organization is transformative education. Our transformative education is based in multidisciplinary curriculum in which we may use metaphysics, we use spirituality, somatic work, body work, a lot of history and trauma recovery work. We also provide direct services. To become familiar with our work, please visit our website, urbantriage.org. Today, I'm moderating a panel on social justice and protest. I'm going to just start with the question so we can get right into the panel. We only have a little time. And the folks that we have, these beautiful women that we have on our panel, we have tons to say, including me. Okay, so we're just going to get right to it. And I'm going to ask each panelist just to do like a quick intro of who you are right before answering the question. And we're going to start with Mai. So the first question is, have you ever organized, or if you have any experience of organizing protest or mobilizing people? And it's going to be two-pronged. So if you do, what considerations should be taken into account when looking at the if, when, and how to engage in protest? So we'll shorten that question and stop there. And we'll start with Mai.
Thank you, Brandy. I'm very excited for this opportunity. My name is Mai. I am the CEO and founder of Hmong American Leadership and Economic Development, also the chair for Governor Evers' Equity and Inclusion Council. And I think I've engaged in my first organizing protest organizing during COVID with the hate crimes, and especially during the George Floyd era. And so prior to that, I've always engaged in not the planning, but the organizing piece of getting folks there. And a couple things that I would definitely share with as you're planning one is knowing the power map, right? Power mapping your community, knowing who's all parties that you should get involved in to ensure that you are able to get the maximum amount of turnout and the voices heard.
Okay, I should unmute myself. Thanks, Mai. We're going to go to Angela, the same question, same consideration. Have you ever organized, mobilized people, have experience with mobilizing folks? And if you have, what should be some things that folks should consider when planning, if, when, and why? I think that's the question. Yep. If, when, and how to engage was the actual question mark. Angela, go ahead.
Thank you, Brandy. And hello, everyone. I am just so excited to be here. This conversation is so important, and I'm completely pumped. As mentioned, I'm Angela, and I'm based in Madison. I have organized, and in that, to me, the question is, Brandy, isn't necessarily a matter of how, more than the if. For instance, I think that there are people that are well-meaning, that, simply being present and attending these protests don't really signify like true support, right? Like, to me, it's very superficial. And most of the time I feel that it's more detriment than it is helping with the movement. More meaningful to me would be essentially, mobilizing and getting folks really excited, especially those who are oppressed, and to show up for the cause, because we're in it because we're busy. There's so many things that are going on. We're wearing many hats, and we do a lot. And it's very taxing to be fully informed in what's happening. And so to that, it's no fault of the community. It's just that sometimes we're just too busy that we just can't keep up with all the things that keep happening. So as an organizer, you got to get in there and you have to inform people, like whether it's calling folks, individually or activating your network. Like, those are just one of many examples and actions that needed to be taken in order to spread the word. But before I end this, I do want to preface that for today's conversation, the views and opinions are wholly mine and not reflective of or representative of my employers. So don't blame them. They're all mine. Thought I'd throw that out there first.
Right. Thank you, Angela. Okay, next on the panel is Annette.
Brandy, so great to be on this panel with you and with Mai and Angela and Taylor. So Annette Miller, CEO and founder of Equity by Design. I am here in Madison, Wisconsin, and I have been in this community for 30 years. I also want to say I'm a Generation X person. And so the reason I think that's important is because I think where you sit generationally also has a lot to play into how we view protesting and the value of protesting, and the value of how we use our bodies. So I come after the boomers, and the boomers were definitely where the civil rights protesting sat in that generation, hard. As a Generation X person, for me, I think it's great to use your body, but I think for me, where I've really sat is I mobilize people, I activate people, but not for protest, but for policy. I feel like if you're not making the change, you can be present, which is really important because you've got to get that anger out, you got to get that frustration, and you have to have people visually see the importance of the movement. However, we also need to have people doing the policy work to create the change. And so I have felt like I am better at the policy work and mobilizing the voice for policy than I am being in the streets. But I am a great ally and supporter, both financially and friendship-wise and relationship-wise, with the people who protest. I feel like it's a both and. And I know me and I know what I'm good at. And I was like, I'm not good at the protest part. I don't know how to get the energy all up, and in that way. But what I am really good at is I'm really good with words and I'm really good with relationships. And so I want to get people's voices on what change they want. And so that's what I work on. I mobilize people for that and around that. And I think that is the complement to the protest part, is that you need to have people like me and others like me helping to complement the protest part, because I think that is the next complementary part of the action, because you really actually got to get the change, right? You got to get the shift.
Period and point blank. Thank you so much. The next person on our panel is Dr. Taylor. You want to do a quick intro and then answer the question, do you have experience mobilizing, organizing? And if so, or if you don't, what are some things that folks should take in consideration if and when or how they engage in protest?
Absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Sequana Taylor. I am on the Milwaukee County Board representing District 5, also the vice chair. I sit on the school board as well, and I'm the vice president of the school board. I've had, I don't want to say several instances that when you talk about protest and organizing. I come from a union background. I was a union president. So that's kind of where I got my voice in. Started the platform when we talk about organizing and protesting. And so I think they both go hand in hand. And to me, when you're protesting, it's the voice of the unheard. You want people to visually see these individuals out there for something that has happened that we need to bring more awareness to. So I do believe protest is things that are needed depending on what's going on. Also, though, if you are not changing policy, like I heard before, then you're just protesting. And so I often tell those individuals that I'm either organizing with, or marching with or walking with, there has to be some deadlines too. Like if you're going to protest, what are the wants and needs that you're putting into place? And then what are some exact needs, right? Because we often have these great ideas of what things should do. And when you look at the legality of things, laws don't change overnight, right? There's a process. So we need to ensure that when you're doing this, you're making sure that they understand exactly what you're going for. And if you're just protesting, but we're not changing the policies and procedures of what went wrong, then there is no change. So you have to make sure that they both go hand in hand, and also make sure that it's organized and structured. A lot of times you get there and, you feel the momentum and it's great, but also you need to make sure that you have, and we are doing this for this cause, and we will continue to do this until this happens. And I need to make sure that we have specifics there with deadlines and time based on it as well, too, so that we're not just out there just marching or protesting or voicing our opinion, but that we absolutely are doing this to institute change.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. So I'm just going to kind of reiterate what I heard you guys say as a collective. And what I heard you say is, one, I heard Angela say, what stood out to me is, if you're just there to look and be present, don't come, okay? Two, what I also heard you guys communicate is that, hey, things need to happen simultaneously, right? Folks who feel certain lanes need to do it together with the same objective. So the protesters often can't be the same ones who's pushing for change. And that's because the work of protesting, organizing, mobilizing is a lot of work. And a lot of times people don't understand, like when you're actually in the work, what it takes to protect everybody, or what it takes to get all the supplies, what it takes to cultivate. What I heard Dr. Taylor say is demands. Like, why are we doing this again? What is it that you want to accomplish, right? And what legally can be done, right? And considering the I guess the long-term goal, right? We want community control over police. That's the demand. And you may have to take smaller steps to get there. So we're going to start with a community review board or committee or something that's leading to this overarching goal of community control over policing. And I would also like to say what stood out to me from what Annette said is the difference in generations and perspectives, right? And that's really important. And one of the things I often say is that we got to work on doing is respecting each other's lane and appreciating the generations that's coming up behind us, because there energy is different, their lens is different, their perspective is different, and we have to honor that and support that and edify the differences while I guess being in communication with younger folks and offering our support and analysis versus being like, those young folks, I don't know what they're doing. So all of that is so important, that the protesters are out there mobilizing, and it's really the market work, right? It's like the public relations. Protesters like, this is what's going on. And then we also have to have policymakers and people inside systems pushing for change. So thank you guys for all of that. So our next question is, what really is the objective of protest and what can it accomplish? So what I heard folks say so far is that it can accomplish policy change, but we also need that other element. What else can protest accomplish and has? And anyone can just jump in and answer the question.
Dr. Sequana Taylor again. I would say the awareness of what's going on. Right. A lot of times some individuals may not know to the entity of what happens because we are so segregated. You know, when I think about Milwaukee and Wisconsin, what may be happening necessarily on one side of town may not necessarily be the trauma and barriers on another one. So I believe it brings people together to see some of the awareness, as well as to tell and see some of the differences and changes that they want to see. And then I'll step back and let someone else come on and answer as well.
Mai, do you want to add? Yes, you do. Look,
yes, I do. Thank you, Brandy. No, and I appreciate all the perspective, because that is true coming from a policy background. I think there is the positive sides to the protest is the advocacy and the education, right? Cross education, not just to policymakers, but our brothers and sisters from other communities who may not know what's going on within our community, like what Angela had mentioned. But that comes down to being proactive, right? In order for, just like what Annette said, in order for these protests to be, you know, positive as far as high impact, there's multiple other avenues that has to happen, like not only being at the big event, but going to your council meetings, right? Protesting at those meetings, making sure your voice is heard before a policy is passed. So those are some of the things that is actively organizing some of those smaller events, because it's harder as policymakers or BIPOC legislators to organize and push policy when you need those folks to show up and get the voices out there.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mai. Anybody else want to contribute to that question? Go ahead, Annette. Annette was like, me. Over here.
Yeah, me. No, right. So what I want to add to it also is that I think protests are really important because it really allows the emotional steam to come out and to be present. You need to understand the magnitude and the scale of the harm or the trauma or the pain or the need. And it tells the story in a way that, you know, inside activists and people focused on policy can't do. And so that is another, so you need all of it. You need the protest and you need the storytelling that comes from the protest. There have been many people who have been at protests that you wouldn't normally see, because this was their way of being able to get out and to express their frustration and their desire to have change. So I think that is why protests are really important, because I think as a society, we need to see the magnitude of the impact, right? And so, you know, that is vital. It is vital. And so I just think that it's really important for people to have that as one of many things that need to happen. I think, like what's been pointed out, the protest can't be the start and the end. The protest is one measure of understanding magnitude and scale.
Yeah, all of that, right? And I had someone say on Facebook the other day, they did not know what Roe versus Wade was, right? So we have this tremendous, court, Supreme Court case being overturned, which basically, for folks who may or may not know, Roe versus Wade it made it a constitutional right for women to be able to decide what was best for their body, whether they have an abortion or not, right? And at this current juncture, with the case being overturned, a lot of states, including Wisconsin, is now illegal to have an abortion. So when we talk about protests and we talk about education and awareness, now we have some protests breaking out. So then my question to you guys is, when is it appropriate, right? A lot of times we're kind of reactive with protests. Someone's murdered, we react. Roe versus Wade is overturned. Now we're reacting. So that's what protest historically has been. But I don't know what the question I'm asking, but when do you think it's best to get out there and get the awareness and marketing and analysis and education for the people, if we're saying that protest and policy change needs to go hand in hand? And anyone can jump in there and answer. I feel like Angela wants to answer, and she does. I do. Yes, look at me.
You're reading minds here. We're on. I just want to add to like all of the above for the past question, for the last question here. You know, to me, it's also a signifier, right? Like I think that protest sends a very clear message to those who may be feeling isolated, that they're not alone in this, that there are like-minded folks in the community and we're showing up and they could too be part of it. I mean, for me, you know, being raised as a Chinese American, first-gen immigrant, this protesting, being out in the streets, using your voice, speaking up is not part of my culture because it's very hierarchical, it's very patriarchal. Like we have to respect our elders. I never grew up dare to even speak out of turn. And so those are those changes personally that I've worked on very hard to really unlearn and undo, because this is a part of the new society now. And I think it's important for folks like me to really step out of my comfort zones, to be able to be my whole self. You know, we talk about it a lot, be your authentic self. Well, you know what? I'm going to use my words, my voice for good. And I think to your second question, Brandy, I see protests as it's a form of communication. It's a form of dialogue. It's just one of many in which we are engaging with one another. I don't think that there is a specific path or trigger mechanism to engage in either form. It's what works for folks as they see fit for that specific moment. You know, I think we've continued to talk about, you know, Annette, Dr. Taylor, and that there are times and there are certain people utilizing their skills to either get out in the streets and be loud and do the protests. And there are some of us who are organizing and still using our voice in maybe engaging in debates or simply conversations over Facebook or in person about what it's like to be, you know, continue to live in a system of oppression, for instance. And there does not need to be a specific forms or strategy. It has to be all of the above.
That was great. I love that. Before I ask the question I want to ask, I'm gonna let other people jump in and add to the second question. Anybody could jump in. It's mine.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say, you know, second what Angela said, and the one thing that we hear, and I think this is very important, right, there's never a right time for anything like this, right, and the reactiveness comes out, but I think it's important. It's just like, for crying out loud, we got to overcome the stigma of being silent, right? As you're silent, then you're okay with it. And so at certain point, we have to overcome that. I think as a Asian American woman, I've had to learn that through even work, right? Our workforce, and even as women in general, is when you're passive, you get pushed around. At some point, that passive barrier has to break in order for you to be assertive and so as we talk about working simultaneously, I think there's a struggle in organizing, right? Organizing work is volunteer and passion work. And there's not a lot of, we have a lot of organizer, but it's hard. As you talk to organizers, they're at capacity, but I think that's really important for us to get new and young folks, fresh and passionate about it. If you're passionate and you're at these protests, I think it's really important to also be part of these other pieces. As we have legislative days talking about immigration policy, and we're trying to look for stories. We don't want the stories just at the protests. We also want the stories directly going to our senators too, right? And writing those, and those are continuous. So it should be happening before and after even anything happens.
Amen to all of that. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things I heard, the different modes of protest, right? Some people think of protest, the folks out in the street with the bullhorns like I did, where I pissed off a lot of people, but that's okay. That's a whole nother topic. Okay, amen, amen. There's also different modes of protesting, like writing letters, right? Showing at your city council meetings, showing up at your county supervisor meetings, showing up at your school board meetings, staying informed, maybe writing blogs, any really outlet of expression, in my opinion, that moves against status quo, right? And social constructs that say this is the right way to be. And as we heard in the patriarchal context, women are really even though we're, in 2022 and we're making progress, right? Women are still seeing like, why, to be a woman, to speak loud, to speak matter of fact, to speak without apology is seen as masculine, aggressive, or the B word, right? And oftentimes it's not seen the same across races, right? So if you're a white woman doing it, oh, look at you being confident and pushing the envelope. And when you're a non-white woman and darker, there's like this spectrum, right? The darker you are, the less acceptable it becomes. So I think that's also a part that we often don't talk about, is the colorism. And then I heard someone say silence, right? Like this whole way of being in a society where we're cultivated and conditioned to remain silent and not to risk it and not to push it. But in order for the domino to fall and for us to create a new paradigm that really centers the humanity of all, we have to push it. And I also heard someone say being young, right? We need new faces. Absolutely. Once I got to a certain age, I cannot be organized. I am not going to be out there, y'all. Sometimes people have expectations. I'm like, not today. My body and bones and joints cannot take it. What else could we add to the conversation about when it's appropriate, before anything else that we missed? Is there anything else you want to add, Annette or Dr. Taylor?
I think what I want to add is that I think we need to realize, and it's been said, that it is a way of communicating, right? I think protesting is super important because a lot of times protesting is coming from people saying, I'm not heard, I'm not seen, and I'm not being represented. And so when we do use the strategy, of policy, and working within the system, it's not enough. And so I feel that it needs to be a both and strategy. And what I also believe is that we need to stop we purposefully have put stigma around protesting. The system has purposefully, and I mean law, you are right, police the powers that be have made protesting bad because it feels chaotic, there's no control, and they can't manage. And that's why they don't like protesting. But that needs to happen by design, right? Because there's a problem, it's not being solved. And by being responsible, by using talking and conversation, that's not working. And so sometimes, at the end of the day, you have to use the stick and you have to use the honey, right? And so that's why I believe it needs to be both and. So when we talk about if and when and how, I think you do it when you use both and any other strategies when you are trying to make the change that needs to happen. Because the reason protesting is being used is because people are saying what we're doing isn't working. It isn't enough. And so this is going to be my method for which I need the system and for society or for a neighborhood or community or whoever to listen, to wake up, to shake the change and say, in the shackles and say, it needs to be different. This needs to stop.
Yeah, to all of that, right? And I just want to add to the silence, because you can protest in silence too. We know that, right? With the kneeling, all heck broke loose, right? Back in the day when Black Olympians won, they put their fist up. That was a silence protest, right? And that caused controversy. And this is the whole thing. They don't want protests to happen because protest is the marketing. It is the awareness. It is the, and this is the whole thing when protests erupt is usually after years of something happening, the destruction of a people or the destruction of land or whatever. It's years. It's not something that is one thing that triggers it. It's multiple events that trigger it. And people just get sick and tired of being sick and tired. Anything else you guys want to add to that piece, or anything random that came up as we were talking about things?
Yeah,
you
and
an idea and you're like, oh, wait, I want to say that. Go ahead, Dr. Taylor.
Yeah, and also when we talk about protesting and organizing, and it usually brings a lot of different groups of ethnicity and people together. And I often say, especially when we are out there and you're organizing and protesting, and it's for those communities of color, we are so grateful for our allies that don't always look like us, but remember to also give us that space so that we can vocalize what we want. If it's a specific group, don't take over as an ally to become their voice. You need to make sure that you're speaking with them, not just for them. And so that's always very important.
That's a good one. Yes. Thank you so much for that. And I would add to that is what happens next, right? After protests erupt, people are emotional. They're feeling the heart, and like, oh my God, we need to do something. And then we got 90 days past that moment, and you stop investing, you stop showing up, you stop funding. So my question is, how can community funds or funding or investments or donations support like interventions, whether it's police violence or calling police less, or community funds supporting programs that dig up or deal with or support the roots being uprooted. And when I say roots, what I'm referring to really, and this wasn't on your question, y'all, I'm sorry, I just kind of came up with this. So when we think about the roots, what we're talking about is like racism, right? Like, how do we dig up racism? How do we dig up the impacts of racism on non-white people too, because we all align with it and somehow are impacted. Sometimes it's through states or institutions, and sometimes it's in our character and our personality, right? How do we dig up the roots of the violence in community? Is it through funding? What is it? How do we prevent some of this before it even happens? And that was a mouthful for a question. Anybody want to try to unpack the question and answer?
Right. It was a lot.
Like, okay, I'll do it. Fine. Okay.
Right. I think we often don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, right? Usually when I'm at a lot of, whether it's conventions or places, I'm usually the Black woman, right? And so they want me to speak for the whole race of people. But I often think we don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, because a lot of times someone may feel offended. And I often say, unless we talk about it, we can't get past it. So let's talk about it. Let's get offended. Let's get over it, and let's get to work. And so it takes a lot of that dialogue, that working together, that community efforts. And then the funding should go to those that really dig into it. We see a lot of times there's 1,000 programs and initiatives on the ground, but it seems like we're still dealing with some of the same issues and barriers. And so I think we need to take a new look, at some of that funding and some of those institutions and initiatives, and see where we either overlapping or where we missing. And so I think it does take that community effort to understand, but also kind of dig a little deeper in depth to what is really needed versus what do we think is needed.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, when you say what looks good, right, feels good, people, it doesn't. Like, we're in the context of our society, anything that hurts or brings us pain, we're kind of conditioned to move away from it. In reality, it is through the pain that we have aha moments. It is through the pain that we have like these epiphanies and discoveries. So we have to really get into the practice of having the conversations with the folks that are causing harm and holding space for the folks who are harmed, right? Acknowledging, accepting what it is and acting on it. Amen. Anybody else want to add anything to that? Mai wants to add to this.
Yes, I would add to that. In regards to the funding, I totally agree. But I think number one thing that in order for us to get past, even with the funding, is we got to get more people at the seat. We got to stop tokenizing. Right. Institutional racism exists daily in all levels. And I think by ensuring that you are aware of your settings and how you implement those laws and policies and how you engage folks, you can have a person of color. But when you tokenize them, realize what, Dr. Taylor had mentioned is we can't be the voice of all. That's why you got to have to diversify those boards. because you only know one organization. We can't keep putting organizations on a pedestal either, because there's other small organizations, grassroots organizations that are doing the work. And I talked about not having enough funding to organize and do the right thing in communities. That's why it's super important for us to invest in local funding of local organizations also.
That is everything, because it's so true. And this is the thing about things being comfortable. We, in our society, we like to support the things we've been supporting. Not the things that are will uprooted and do the work that's needed. And part of this, what did Dr. Joyce DeGroy say? She said, we have to deal with all of this simultaneous. The assault of the injustice and state violence must end, right? At the same time, we need to unpack the trauma that comes along with it. And for people known as Black and other folks who are at the disproportionately impacted by systemic racism and this power dynamic, it's been compounded, right? 400 or 500 years of trauma upon trauma upon trauma. And when people are traumatized and dealing with trauma, their nervous system is dysregulated. They have hyper responses, exaggerated responses. It's hard to have hope, faith, and be empowered and have the confidence to move and do something different when you're traumatized, right? So we have to deal with the trauma. We have to stop the assault. We have to deal with the policy stuff. And we have to allocate resources rooted in the humanity of people, right? What else could we add to that? What else needs to happen? Go ahead, Annette.
Yeah, so this is my sweet spot, as if you don't know. So Equity by Design, we do two types of work. We do systems change work inside of organizations, and we also do public engagement. So that's the softer side. We mobilize and we organize, but not for protest, but for voicing, to help understand what is it that we need to know from our communities, and especially our historically marginalized, underserved, looking at different identity groups that just are not present at the table. That is what we do at Equity by Design. And so what I want to add to what has been put on the table is that it's more than, well, let me step back. I think first, we need to acknowledge the history of the U.S. And the history of the U.S. is that decisions and policy have been made by white men. They were not made by Native Indigenous people. They were not made by people who are of Asian descent. They were not made by Black Africans or anyone of the diaspora. They were not made from people who are Latinx, Hispanic. It has not been made from a racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic lens at all. That is not what the history of policy and rules and law has not been made from that. What was made was a way to control racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic groups, okay? So if you're white and you know that the system works for you because it was designed by your predecessors, right? And you continue to benefit from it. Regardless of if you agree or not, or if you're silent or not, right? You've been benefiting. And so the reason that we need to change systems and the reason we need to change law, the reason we need to change policy is because those policies are rooted in a white lens. And a white lens does not understand the story or the journey or the history of a Black or African diaspora individual, or of an Asian, or of Native American, or of Latinx, Hispanic, or of LGBTQ, of women, don't understand the history of women, right? And we've seen that play out yet again. And the problem that we're not recognizing is that we need to collaborate and co-create together, right? We have to look at laws and policies together with a intersectional lens. How do these policies work for all of us? How do they hurt all of us? And how do we change them? And so we have to use whatever means are necessary to make that happen. And so, that's the root cause right there, is that it is not, the laws and the policies are made with a white lens. And so what Equity by Design is doing is we're saying we need to have other lenses at the table. You need to let the communities and the people be able to say, here is what is going to change and shift my my world, my life, my health, my economic status, my workforce status, my identity status. I have to be the one to say it because you don't know. And that is what needs to happen, is that we need to have those voices of non-white or not white men telling other people what they think will change our lives because they don't know. And I'm gonna stop because obviously I got some feelings.
Right, Annette went in like, okay, this is my question right here. Okay.
I cannot stay silent. Oh my gosh. Yes,
Right.
yes. Drop the mic. Preach. I mean, this is it. This is not a, what do they call it? Oppression Olympics, right? It's not one or the other. Like, we could be it's Black joy is an anti-Asian, you know what I'm saying here? It's not one or the other. It's all of it. And this is exactly what the white supremacy structure is all about. It's that they want us to pit against one another because the more we fight, guess who stays in power and continue to hold that power.
Exactly.
I just
all
have
of
to
that.
say that.
Yeah, period, in point blank. So part of this, y'all, is what I heard Annette say, is that we need to practice co-creating, right? And we all know that we exist in systems and federal government systems, institutions that's rooted in paternalism, right? This design where we have white men, usually older white men, decided on policies, procedures, laws, and everything else that most impact the folks at the bottom of this triangle. And I also would like to add, so part of this is that when we think about our systems, even our education system, whether we're talking about public education, universities, academia, however, all of that is rooted in white supremacy. So even the education we receive to move different, to do something different, become creative, is using the tools of those folks who are in power. So even when we bring folks into a space that's other colors other than white or non-white, we often get the same result. And that's a piece that we have to really start unpacking too, is how do we work together in this co-creation, collaboration, to not only just engage, but to educate. Because we often like to engage, but we got to educate the folks being engaged. Because like I said, some folks don't even know what Roe versus Wade is. Some folks don't even understand state violence, and they're the ones that's most impacted by it. So then we move and say, you need to come to this thing. And they like, girl, I ain't got time for that, because they don't understand the depth and breadth of how it impacts them, their child's education, and their wellness as a whole. What else could we add to this, Dr. Taylor and Mai?
Ooh, they've said so much, right? Like dropping the mic. I love that, in that that educational piece is so vital to all of us when you said that impact of not only learning about us, because a lot of times within our own communities, we don't know what's going on, and we don't know about some of the other challenges or how do we got there, or like you said, the importance of attending those meetings, the impact that it'll have on your life, people not understanding. I often say, when it was knocking at my front door, if you help me, none of this in your backyard, we could have both took care of it together, right? And so we need to sometimes get out of that mindset of that's them over there. That's their issue, that's their problem, that's their barrier, because believe me, it becomes all of ours. And I often say too, when we talk about like the Black Lives Matter and the All Lives Matter, and I won't go deep into that, but I have to often tell people, well, until Black Lives Matter or Hmong Lives Matter or Native American Lives Matter, Indigenous People Lives Matter, that's when all lives will matter, right? So one can't matter over the other. And if they are, if we are experiencing disparities in racial injustice, then all lives are not mattering. And so that's how we have to look at it, especially when we in certain places, to break it down and let them understand. We never said all lives didn't matter. We just said continuously every day we are showing that ours do not. And I think that educational piece on all fronts is so vital to everything that we do, whether we are protesting, organizing, or trying to change policy. Because if we don't know the educational foundation piece of it or how to go forward with it, then that's how they continue to keep us exactly where they want us to be. And that's when we have to stand up and say, no, not anymore.
not today. And then they keep us fighting against each other, even within our own social group, right? Like
all the time.
We take these hard stands, and including me. If you know anything about me, go back in time, including me. So even in my own transformation, I had to learn that unless we're willing to be uncomfortable and, allow other people to be, because that's what humanity is. So the more that I did the work and the more I talked about humanity and learned about what it really means to center humanity, that means that people actually get to actualize how they actualize. They get to manifest, they get to live their life as long as they're not harming others. And that means that when we engage in conversations, whether we agree or not, that person gets to have those ideas and those identities. And I don't get to be mad at them. And if I am, then I have to go back and ask myself, why? Why am I mad that they sleep with a man and they're a man? Why is that even my business, right? So a part of this is how do we start really making space for the and, right? And then centering those most impacted. And I mean, those that's most impacted may change, right? Sometimes in this context in Dane County, a lot of times the conversation is centered around people known as Black because they're most impacted. Sometimes the conversation is centered around Indigenous people because they're most impacted. Sometimes the conversation is centered around trans people because they're most impacted, as it should. And it shouldn't, as you guys pointed out, mean oh, you don't care about me, my life. That's not how this works. When we talk about centering people, we have to center the ones that's most impacted, because our opinion I'm privileged, I'm Black and I'm privileged. So there's some conversations I just have to stay out of, right? Anything else we can add to that or consider?
Yeah, I would say the last thing, Annette had mentioned that about it, and Dr. Taylor's alluded to it earlier about allies, I think, and co-creating. When you talk about giving space, I think even in spaces of advocacy that we don't dominate, asking our allies to be very mindful, right? Because I've had allies who goes, well, I don't think community of color likes to be called marginalized. I'm like, well, how do you know that, right? And so giving space for us to define what we need, our needs are, but really going back to organization. I run an organization that we do the empowerment economics training models for BIPOC, communities of color, and we're very community driven, right? Community focused as one of the core elements and programs by design should be developed by the community themselves or whoever is going to use it versus they hire up. That's how you're going to engage. And that's what we see a lot in institutional racism, is that they create a program that is not for the people. People don't come use it, and they go, well, it didn't work out because they didn't come. Well, it's not designed by the community. So that's really crucial as we think about systemic changes, even for organizations of color, as we talk about it, because we do see a lot of infights, right, around that because of the lack of resources, the survival mode always constantly. And that's what the systemic does to us. But when we could do that co-creation even within our communities and get communities groups together and do coalition building around those programs, that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, all of that. Amen. So part of in my whole utopia world, all organizations that center folks who are most vulnerable would work together all the time. What do you do? Who do you educate? What's your target population? And then that, then we'll do direct referrals and, but the way that the system is set up is if I'm working with you, then that means somehow I'm competing against you for the funding, right? So yeah, it's this whole capitalism thing is something special at the best. So what we do know is that a lot of times tables aren't really set for those who are most vulnerable. And matter of fact, they set the table and then invite folks. So what are some things that we could do better in terms of really doing the work to engage those most vulnerable? Because a lot of times people they need to come to city council meeting. Ain't nobody got time for a 6-hour meeting when you're already surviving poverty. You feel hopeless, desperate. You're trying to figure out where you're going to live. You're going to try to figure out how you're going to maneuver 2 jobs and taking care of your children. So what would be the most impactful, effective way to engage and implement the voices of those most vulnerable?
I think I'll jump in because I guess I'm one of the ones that's at the meetings, right? Like as an elected. And I often say that we create these time barriers to, if we're having meetings in the morning and most individuals are working, we don't get the voice of those that are most impacted, right? And so how do we create that space and opportunity? Why aren't we having some meetings in the community? I often created this youth day so people can come to the courthouse. But when you think about coming to the courthouse, it's not always a good feeling. Usually you're there because something is wrong. So how would it look if we took some of those meetings into a community, right? Whether it was a nonprofit or grassroots organization, what would it look like to have a meeting at the park, right? To have a meeting at the Boys and Girls Club, right? To have a meeting at a restaurant, right? Because we're meeting those individuals where they are in their community so that they feel comfortable and invited enough to come and speak to us. And so I think it takes creating different opportunities, creating that environment where they feel welcome or where they have accessibility to come. And I think that's when we have to start as electives looking at something different, not to make it easier for us, but to make it more inviting and welcoming for the community that we serve.
Yes, all of that. So creative, innovative, right? We got to get out of our own way. And oftentimes it's the policies, it's the procedure. Where the policies doesn't allow us to do that. The policy doesn't allow us to do that. Well, you get to change policies. You get to vote, city council people, board of education. You get to change it if you desire to. Go ahead, Annette.
Yeah, I want to add to what Dr. Taylor is saying, is because not only should the systems change in terms of how they seek and identify voices, and they should do it collaboratively, and I think we all need to realize no one entity holds all the voices. So that's why you have to collaborate, and we need to stop perpetuating that thinking ourselves. No one voice holds all voice. So let's work together to get the voices, right? Systems need to change in terms of how they get the voice. System also needs to change the model for why they want the voice. Okay, because
explain that.
Yeah, so we need to stop doing this. Let's vote like yes or no. That's not helpful for people. People's lives need to change, right? Their health, their children, the education, neighborhoods, housing, food insecurity, security, businesses. So have the right conversation, right? Don't bring me down there to play politics, on this. That's not what this is about. If you want my voice, I want to offer my voice so that I can change the housing situation, so I can change food insecurity, so I can change how people can work, change how people can live, change how people can coexist. I want to be able to go to a park and not have some Karen tell me that I can or cannot be at the park, right? I don't need the police to tell me, if I am behaving according to some frame of what it means to be a good person, right? Like, we need to stop that, right? What we need is to have systems ask questions that change lives. But we also need individuals and people who feel that their voices aren't heard to change their ways too. You need to identify what you want to make change on and then make yourself available, right? Make yourself available. If it can't be in person, then leave that audio message, send that text, send that email, make a video on social media, talk to your electeds, you talk to the organizations that are trying to advocate on your behalf, but don't sit and wait for somebody else to change the situation. We individually and collectively have to change our own situation. And because the systems have set up the power dynamics, we've given up, right? Unless we really get red hot mad, we sort of have given up. Or we haven't developed ourselves enough to understand that we need to speak up. However, we need to share that voice, we need to do that.
Amen.
So it's both sides. It's both sides. It's not just one side.
Yeah, and that's why we have to educate people, because if you're surviving poverty and you're enduring trauma after trauma, ain't nobody thinking about no system change. I could barely change my underwear. I could barely change my frame of mind, right? So that's why transformative education is so important. And that's why Urban Triage, we do what we do. We help people understand what's occurring in their context, what's occurring in their world, and understand what they can do about it. Because it's one thing to know what's going on, but sometimes you look at the system and it feels so big and so hopeless that just to get into consideration of it causes more anxiety and more panic attacks. And I honestly rather spend my Thursday doing something that's more relaxing, like having a glass of wine. You know what I'm saying? So part of it is like, we got to do the co-creating together. We got to fund the organizations like Urban Triage that do the work of transformative education for the people, the community. And then we have to do the change inside the institutions, inside the systems, and do it simultaneously. Because if we can all use, not all use, but we know the definition of words like white supremacy, patriarchal capitalism without getting offended, but understand that white supremacy, patriarchal capitalism has nothing to do with race, but some people who control our universe telling us that we shouldn't all get along, then we have a different human expression of it when we have the deeper and bigger understanding. So we're only have a few minutes left. I think we haven't had a time check yet, but I want to give an opportunity. We got 4 minutes left, so we can do this. We can ask one question from the audience really quick and see if Nate or someone was supposed to ask the questions. Do we have one? If not, that's okay too, because we can talk. Okay, we're just gonna keep talking. So anything, one thing I wanna say, ask is, now what? We've had this discussion. What can we do? People on the panel, what are you gonna do? What's your commitment? And what can others do to really be in integrity as it relates to centering humanity, no matter what your opinions are, Just jump in now. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm gonna say one thing out of what I've got is our commitment to addressing and continuing to create support circles for imposter syndromes, right? As women of color and communities of color, and that's why protest happens, is you're sitting here like, can't just be me feeling like this, and that's when you get a group. But I think when we could have continuous mentor or support groups to really overcome these imposter syndrome and to address microaggression, that's really, really important for us. And I think there's, more work that needs to be done around that when we talk about co-creating and coming together.
All right, Angela, Annette, go ahead.
I think we need to push back on systems, and we need to push back on all the systems. So I said systems to make it sound like, like who is they, them out there. So we need to push back on the private sector and corporate community. We need to push back on the nonprofits. We need to push back on small business. We need to push back on community and neighborhoods. We need to push back on any and all of us need to be a part of looking for opportunities to make the change that needs to happen. This needs to be an inside and an outside game. Yes, we must protest, right? Whether it's silently or loud. We also need to change policy. Each of us, the amazing thing about our communities is that we do see the problems. So let's also make sure that while we're protesting and letting people know the magnitude, that we're also working together to make the systems change, like policy change, process change, people change, diversify, not just at the board level, but on the ground in terms of how people work and how people live. And how people interact with the systems. We all could do that. We can all do that. And yes, we need our programs and our organizations to help with that. So, but we all have to ask for more, and we all have to push for more, and we all have to change.
All of that.
I'll jump in quick. It's, everything, all of the above. Ultimately, to me, I think that, our liberation is bound together. We have to continue to co-create, collaborate, to uplift one another. We're in this together, and this isn't the time to, again, cherry pick who is more oppressed, who is more impacted.
Yeah.
We're all impacted. We're all oppressed.
Yeah.
And we have to collectively push for all the changes I would say policy levels across like all of it. It can't, not just at the municipal level or the county level, even at the federal level. These policies have to change, and policymakers who's been there for generations, I mean, they have to change too, you know, because of the policy. I mean, obviously the policies aren't changing. So who is responsible for these policies? The people. And if they're not doing the work and they're not representing the communities, the voters, us, our voices, then they have to go as well.
Amen. How about you, Dr. Taylor?
Absolutely. And what all of the other ladies said, us coming together, you know, no one being more impressed than one, and using that united front. I think also continuing that educational piece, right? The educational foundation of how do we actually get policies change? What is the process? How do we organize? I think also, and then those individuals that are elected, such as me, and that you guys have elected to do the work of the people, making sure they push back against the status quo, making sure that they bring in front of their boards and, you know, those constituents legislation that does change. It has to start with them, not just being a voice to say feel good things. I think we're at the point now where I heard a young person tell us that good intentions isn't good anymore, right? So we can't just have good intentions about what we want to see done. We have to actually have some action put behind it and get it done. And so my promise and my commitment is to continue engaging the community, to be visible, to be with those individuals, but also not being the status quo and bringing those resolutions or legislations to my colleagues and pushing them on their issues as well, too, because it's no longer we're at the place where we can just want to feel good and not do anything to make things better for all of us.
Amen to all of that. Hallelujah. And I'll just conclude by reminding us is that we have to do the down and in work. If we're going to do any changing, any policy changing, any systems changing, any whatever change that we desire, it actually does start with us. And a lot of times we're in positions of power, positions of privilege, positions of influence, and we're pointing the finger elsewhere. We should always be pointing the finger towards us. What can I do? What do I need to do? What's occurring in my life? How do I embody the attributes of white supremacy? Where do I project it out? Where am I vomiting in my life? Because remember, institutions are made up of people. People make up institutions. Institutions make up systems. All of it is us. It's always us, right? So I just want to say that and continue to do the great work, y'all. I really enjoyed moderating this panel today. And thank you again, Madison 365, for the opportunity. And bye.
This is 365 Media.